Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the cascading fallout from the release of Epstein's emails and follow up on Epstein's connections to Israeli intelligence with a reporter who first revealed these clandestine ties in an article in August in Reason magazine, Inside Jeffrey Epstein's Spy Industry Connections. Joining us is Matthew Petti, an assistant editor at Reason, who previously reported for the BBC in Persian and English, The Intercept, The Daily Beast, New Lines Magazine, Responsible Statecraft, Middle East Eye, and The National Interest, among other publications. He covers U.S. national security policy and its interactions with American society and domestic politics, and his latest articles at Reason include Jeffrey Epstein's secret role in Washington's Middle East diplomacy. Then we'll examine the scandal swirling around Zelensky, whose former partner in his media company is now on the lam, accused of a $100 million corruption scheme in the Ukrainian energy sector, which has been under relentless Russian attack. Joining us is Dr. Louise Shelley, the Omar L. and Nancy Hurst Endowed Chair Emerita and a University Professor Emerita at George Mason University. She is the founder of the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center at the Shah School of Policy and Government, a leading expert on the relationship among terrorism, organized crime and corruption, as well as human trafficking, transnational crime and terrorism, with a particular focus on the former Soviet Union. She also specializes in illicit financial flows and money laundering, and is the author of Dirty Entanglements, Corruption, Crime and Terrorism, and Dark Commerce, How a New Illicit Economy is Threatening Our Future. Then finally, with the White House busily preparing a defense pact ahead of Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince MBS's Oval Office visit next week, we will speak with Christopher Prebble, the Senior Fellow and Director of the Reimagining U.S. Grand Strategy Program at the Stimson Center. Prior to joining the Stimson Center, he served as co-director of the Atlantic Council's New American Engagement Initiative. He's the author of 4 books, including The Power Problem, How American Military Dominance Makes Us Less Safe, Less Prosperous, and Less Free, Fuel to the Fire, How Trump Made America's Broken Foreign Policy Even Worse, and How We Can Recover. And he co-edited with John Mueller A Dangerous World, Threat Perception and U.S. National Security. He was a commissioned officer in the United States Navy serving aboard the USS Ticonderoga, and has an article at Responsible Statecraft we will discuss. Trump doesn't need to buy Saudi loyalty with a security pact. And before we begin, for over a decade, we have warned that Trump is both a criminal and likely a traitor, not to mention he's mentally unstable, egomaniacal, woefully ignorant, wildly incompetent, insatiably greedy, and corrupt. Now it should be clear to all that his chaotic misrule must be ended as soon as possible, and until that happens, Background Briefing will continue to investigate and expose MAGA criminality and cruelty, but more importantly, explore strategies and popular movements to bring about regime change as quickly as possible to restore democracy and civility and stop the systematic destruction of the United States at home and its standing abroad. To help sustain us with public broadcasting and freedom of the press itself under assault as Trump's billionaire buddies buy up the mainstream media, you can make a tax-deductible donation to our nonprofit foundation, the Public Truth Media Foundation, at publictruthmedia.org or at backgroundbriefing.org/donate. And thank you. And joining us now is Matthew Petti, an assistant editor at Reason, who has previously reported for the BBC in Persian and English, The Intercept, The Daily Beast, New Lines Magazine, Responsible Statecraft, Middle East Eye, and The National Interest, among other publications. He covers U.S. national security policy and its interactions with American society and domestic politics, and his latest articles at Reason magazine include Inside Jeffrey Epstein's Spy Industry Connections and Jeffrey Epstein's Secret Role in Washington's Middle East Diplomacy. Welcome to Background Briefing, Matthew Petti.
Thanks for having me.
So, Matthew, you seem to be among the first journalists, given your article at Reason about Inside Jeffrey Epstein's Spy Industry Connections, to tie Epstein to Israeli intelligence. And just the other day on a TV interview on cable TV, Trump's former lawyer, Ty Cobb, was asked about the petition and the extent to which the Epstein files may eventually emerge from the Congress. And he said, well, the real Epstein story is probably in the files at the CIA, because Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who had clear ties to Mossad and the KGB, he turned over his portfolio to Epstein via his daughter, Ghislaine. So is that your understanding? And he basically said that's where the real story is, which has certainly caught my attention.
So the files that I got, I think, were a lot more modest in what they proved. They were a series of emails that had been floating around the internet from the inbox of Ehud Barak, who was Epstein's former business partner and is not only a former prime minister of Israel, but also a longtime veteran of Israeli intelligence. And in these emails, I saw that Epstein actually had, through his business dealings with Barak, gotten in touch with the former head of Unit 8200, which is the Israeli equivalent of the NSA. And when DropSite sort of followed up on my reporting and chased some of the leads that I had mentioned, they found that this sort of business dealing was not just a business dealing, that Barak was using Epstein to get in touch with Russia, actually, and sort of serving as a back channel for the Israeli state. So I can't speak to, these emails were from a very limited time period involving sort of very late in the game Epstein, but what you can say is clear from this is that he was willing to run errands for governments, certainly the government of Israel, and that he was rubbing shoulders with a lot of very powerful people. And I mean, yeah, he seems to actually want to be involved in the sort of global politics, and he seemed to have the connections to do that. What happened before 2015, what happened after 2015, or, it's not just 2015, but the sort of years immediately before, and what happened before the mid 2010s, what happened after the mid 2010s, I can't really speak to. I don't have those files, but what I can tell you is certainly it looks like Epstein was not just a businessman and not just a sex trafficker.
And what do you know about the Israeli intelligence officer that Epstein hosted at the other building that he has that he's under his brother's name, where he stayed there for some time during this period, I believe?
Yes, Yoni Koren, he was a chief of staff to Barak in the Israeli Defense Ministry. He held a lot of other positions in the Israeli state, and he did. It sort of seemed to be a subsidiary of Epstein's dealings with Barak. That he brought Yoni Koren and had him stay for weeks at a time. Uh, there are some very strange things in those emails and strange interactions. I didn't really know what to make of them. DropSite kind of implied that they were coded messages because they're talking about, transferring money, and there is something about a pair of headphones that's an odd thing for, these old old salts who are hobnobbing with billionaires to get sort of caught up in.
Right. Well, that was a weird thing. It seems like they had some kind of dead drop spy arrangement at a nearby Apple store.
I mean, I can't, I don't want to speculate past what's in the email, but yeah, that's certainly a possibility of what was going on. It was very strange.
Right. So you don't think that there's something beyond just the relationship with Barack and this Mossad veteran Yoni Koren? I mean, did they just suddenly pop up, or is Ty Cobb right in saying that the real focus should be on Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, who had a very intimate relationship with Israeli intelligence and is buried in a place of honor in Israel?
Look, I'm not going to rule any of that out. I'm just saying that what I had in front of me was very limited, but I think it's look, it's very clear that Epstein again was very intimate with people in the intelligence world and the military world, that a lot of these connections came from Israel, and certainly, I mean, what's very inexplicable, and not just on the Israeli side, also on the Russian side. And I just published something earlier today about his connection to Arab states, is that Epstein had the ability to call on favors from people that you really wonder, like, why would they give this guy the time of day? He's he's yes, he's got money, but he's also a sex offender, and he he before these emails started to come out, he didn't appear to be a political figure, if you know what I'm saying.
Right.
So clearly there was a hidden side to Epstein political.
Well, you would think, though, Matthew, that the CIA has a massive dossier on all of this because that's their job, along with FBI counterintelligence, that the CI people would be onto this and that there'd be
Oh,
massive
certainly,
files
yes.
because,
Um, Daniel Boguslav is an independent journalist, wrote an article outlining exactly which CIA offices he would expect to have a file on Epstein. Again, not even going back to Robert Waxwell, but because of the types of people that we know Epstein was mixing with in sort of international business and politics.
so are there journalists looking for the CIA, the CI files, the counterintelligence files? Do we know that they still
Well,
we know that they still exist?
I think by design, that's very hard to say. I mean, I wouldn't know how to get my hands on them if somebody, if I could get my hands on them, that would be a career making move, but I also wouldn't tell you on the show.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
but
Well,
yes, I think that should be a focus of interest. And I think as, Daniel Boguslav's article indicates, there are definitely people paying attention to this.
Well, that's their job, the counterintelligence, both the FBI and CIA. You know, that if foreign countries are spying on the United States or they have their spies spying on top American officials, like former presidents, for God's sake, I mean, we know that basically what Epstein was all about was a compromat factory. He was a blackmail factory, right? That's what he was running.
I mean, there's certainly signs that point to it. I mean, again, I don't know how organized the operation was, but we know for a fact from stuff that's been sort of reported out in legitimate media that he did treat sex as leverage. He did discuss a lot with a lot of different people about how he could leverage it. He sort of tried to blackmail Bill Gates over a consenting adult relationship that he found out about. Um, and he was rubbing shoulders with a lot of, very, very powerful people from different countries. So again, I don't have like evidence that this was an organized, as you put it, a compromat factory, but definitely I think you're right that Epstein was doing the sort of things that any self-respecting counterintelligence officer would be like, what the hell is going on here?
But in terms of your new article, Matthew, Jeffrey Epstein's secret role in Washington's Middle East diplomacy, what is going on there? Because obviously, Middle East diplomacy is at the heart of what's happening now with Mohammed bin Salman visiting the Oval Office on Tuesday, and they're trying to. Apparently, Trump has told MBS that he has to try and make a deal with Israel the minute that the Gaza war is over. So, what was Epstein's secret role?
So this is actually not from the leaked emails I'd gotten earlier. This is from the publicly released emails from congressional investigators. So, these are selectively redacted and selectively released, but what they are giving the public is really fascinating stuff because apparently many different Arab countries, or not many, but yeah, actually, I would say like four different Arab countries approached Epstein or had a relationship with him. He had a relationship with MBS, which is something we knew before, but the emails sort of underscore that MBS was giving Epstein gifts and such. He had a relationship with an Emirati guy whom Epstein describes as the right hand of Maktoum, the ruling family. Epstein apparently had an audience scheduled with the ruler of Qatar, which was canceled, and it's not clear if he ever, rescheduled it because again, it's a limited slice of emails. And there was also someone whose name is completely redacted, so we have no idea who it was, but was apparently asking Epstein for favors on behalf of the government of Kuwait, or favors that would favor Kuwait. What's very interesting about that email exchange is that Epstein then says to get in touch with Ronald Lauder, who's the founder of the Estee Lauder cosmetics company, but is also a sort of, he served in the Reagan administration as ambassador and does a lot of back channel negotiations, particularly involving Israel. He's the president of the World Jewish Congress and does a lot of diplomatic missions. For example, he recently talked to Syria, and yeah, Epstein was telling the Kuwaitis to go talk to this guy, which is very sort of fascinating, fascinating choice of contact to push him towards. But again, I mean, these are just again, this is selective. Like this is the problem with all of the Epstein disclosures. It's just selective bits and pieces that are dribbling out, and you get the sense that there's something strange going on. That this guy was running some kind of political operation, but you just don't know you can't say exactly for whom he was working for. I know you're very convinced of the Israeli theory, but I don't know, like, can't say that conclusively. And you don't really understand what his end game is, or, and I, how his leverage, what his leverage came from. You say compromat factory, that's possible, but we just, it's just, there's no smoking gun. It's just these bits and pieces.
Right. There are these relationships. And as you mentioned, interesting enough, Ron Lauder's relationship with Trump goes back to the 1980s. They were very close friends and they would hang out at Plato's Retreat and chase girls together. So that's a long-standing relationship. So,
Yeah,
uh,
another old Trump buddy who shows up in this is Tom Barak, who is involved in the real estate industry, was also an old Trump buddy, and Epstein seems to be tight with him, tries to put him in touch. You see, it's like mirrors, wilderness and mirrors, because Epstein puts Tom Barak in touch with the Russian ambassador, and now Tom Barak is the U.S. special envoy for Syria and Turkey.
right. Epstein asked him for pictures of some young girl. That's a headline I saw today. What's that all about?
Uh it's not clear. Again, it's just that's the problem with these selective disclosures. We don't know. It could have been asking for a picture of his own kids, like, but
Right.
he just says he said they said let's catch up, and Epstein says, send me a picture of you and child, makes me smile. So it's very unsettling coming from a convicted sex predator.
Right. So what else stood out from this 23,000 pages that from the House Oversight Committee that people have, or lots of journalists are sort of poring over today? What I find interesting, Matthew, is the role of the Republican women, the Congresswomen, who were put under enormous pressure. They had Lauren Boebert in the Situation Room with Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and the Deputy Attorney General twisting her arm and pulling out all the stops to take her name off the discharge petition. And she and Nancy Mason, Marjorie Taylor Greene, have basically held the line, which I find pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think some of it is just this is what the Republican base was told. We're going to get to the bottom of the Epstein files. Child sex trafficking was a big issue, I think, in conservative America, and suddenly we have a really scandalous case, and the administration is saying, uh, "No, you can't see anymore." And it's very, I mean, even these disclosures that came out this week were designed to preempt. I mean, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, said pretty explicitly that we don't need to do this discharge petition because we're already have our own investigation. I think it's I mean it's just we're told this Epstein guy is just like a weird pervert that nobody liked, and he died in prison, and that's all there is to it. But suddenly when people are asking for files on him, then people in power become very evasive, and I think that points to a lot of people being scared of what's going to come out. I think maybe some of these figures don't even know what's going to come out, and that's what scares them, right? Because again, as I said, you got a guy who's rubbing shoulders with extremely powerful people. It's very clear from the emails that he has a reputation as a sex pervert, and I think a lot of people just don't want to know, don't want to find out what's going to be unearthed when you go through his estate, his emails, you go through the Department of Justice case files, you go through the other government agencies' files. Because, I mean, this discharge position is about the Department of Justice, but as you mentioned, the CIA, which is not part of that department, might have a file on him. The Department of the Treasury, according to Senator Ron Wyden, does have files on Epstein and a lot of his international financial transactions. And that would be very interesting to see as well.
Well, they're the FinCEN files, the suspicious activity files, and there's apparently a lot of them, and a lot of money went through his hands, and a lot of money went through Russian banks.
Yes, yes. So,
So the plot thickens here. So just in closing, then, what do you think Trump is going to do to try and take this story off the headlines?
oh God, I mean, there's a lot of different things he can do, but I think they've handled it quite poorly just from a purely cynical position, and they have no idea how to make this go away.
Well, I thank you for joining us here today, Matthew Petti. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. And I've been speaking with Matthew Petti, an assistant editor at Reason, who was previously reported for the BBC in Persian and English, The Intercept, The Daily Beast, New Lines Magazine, Responsible Statecraft, Middle East Eye, and The National Interest, among other publications. He covers U.S. national security policy and its interactions with American society and domestic politics, and his latest articles at Reason include Inside Jeffrey Epstein's Spy Industry Connections and Jeffrey Epstein's Secret Role in Washington's Middle East Diplomacy. We're going to take a brief station break and back examining the scandal swirling around Zelensky, whose former partner in his media company is now on the lam, accused of a $100 million corruption scheme in the Ukrainian energy sector, which has been under relentless Russian attack.
I'm more important in the USA than a spy for the FBI. I'm trained to meet the criminal elite, and I seek out wherever evil resides. I spy.
And joining us now, Dr. Louise Shelley, the Omar L. and Nancy Hurst Endowed Chair Emerita and University Professor Emerita at George Mason University. She is the founder of the Center on Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption at the Shah School of Policy and Government, and a leading expert on the relationship amongst terrorism, organized crime and corruption, as well as human trafficking, transnational crime and terrorism, with a particular focus on the former Soviet Union. And she also specializes in illicit financial flows and money laundering, and is the author of Dirty Entanglements, Corruption, Crime and Terrorism, and Dark Commerce, How a New Illicit Economy is Threatening Our Future. Welcome to Background Briefing, Dr. Louise Shelley.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And it appears that corruption in Ukraine that never went away, it was sort of, in a sense, inherited the corruption from Russia, particularly after the fall of the Soviet Union and during the Yeltsin era with corrupt governments in Ukraine. But now there's a corruption scandal swirling around Zelensky that involves his former co-owner of Zelensky's Kvartal 95 television production company, a guy called Timur Mindich, who was on the lam and accused of a $100 million corruption scheme involving major public enterprises, including the nuclear power company Energatom. So this is about the last thing that Zelensky needs, but it's not entirely clear how his hands are clean.
It's very concerning, and it's very concerning to the citizens of Ukraine because the energy system has been under attack. And part of this corruption scandal is tied to the construction of facilities that was to protect the energy sector. So Ukrainians are going through another year of a freezing winter with less energy than before. And here is an energy scandal involving the top ministers in the energy sector and Zelensky's former associate or partner in his television show. I think he will survive politically, but this is a terrible blow to Ukraine that has tried to be portraying itself as breaking away from the Soviet pattern and being a Western-oriented state.
So specifically, Louise, what is going on here? In other words, the Russians have targeted the energy grid and they're relentlessly attacking it. And it seems that the Europeans are shipping in components and repair facilities as quickly as possible, and the Ukrainians are adapting and being very creative, as they appear to be, in all kinds of ways to resist the Russians, particularly with their production of drones, etc. So are these guys creaming off money and stuff that's coming to the rescue to repair the damaged energy infrastructure? And if so, that's got to really upset the Ukrainian people.
It's not entirely clear at this moment whether the materials are aid, but what is been stated is that the bribes and and money laundering of over $100 million are connected to protecting the energy facilities. So this goes to the heart of Ukrainian survival. And if you may remember, a few months ago, there was an attempt to scale back NABU, which is the anti-corruption agency, and SAP, which is the specialized anti-corruption agency. And here they were only reinstated and given their rights back after massive citizen concern. And now it's these bodies that have found this high-level corruption in the energy sector of Zelensky's inner circle.
Well, it wasn't just the street demonstrations that put pressure on Zelensky. It was also NATO countries, Brussels and Washington, that were absolutely appalled at what was happening. And they obviously put some serious pressure on behind the scenes. So,
Absolutely. You're right to point this out. But it's a combination of both external and very, very strong internal pressure because Ukraine has a very, very active civil society, unlike Russia. And they want these anti-corruption measures in place, and they're wonderful anti-corruption organizations. And many of them appealed to multinational organizations, to governments abroad to support their efforts. So the combination of both domestic and international pressure was key in getting them reinstated. And seeing what they've come up with makes it clear why many people in power in Ukraine wanted them sidelined and not investigating.
but it was Zelensky who attempted to bring Nabu and Sapo under direct government control, right? In a
That's
very
correct.
hastily drafted legislation to scrap the agency and its operational independence. So there's no way that Zelensky's hands are clean on that. Obviously, he backed down, but why he did in the first place is a question that looms. Also, of course, the former energy minister and justice minister, Herman Halushenko, he's one of the suspects, right, in this
Yes,
scheme.
and so you have also the Minister of Justice was in the energy sector previously. So this problem of rotating chairs in the administration has made more people than just those connected directly to the energy sector implicated in this enormous corruption scandal.
So when I was suggesting earlier, Louise, about the transition period under Yeltsin, where it was a free-for-all, the Wild East, as it was called, and you had Kuchma in Ukraine and his successors, and many of them co-opted not just privatized state industries and reaped enormous profits, but they also corrupted the security services and had them work for them. Is there any evidence of that as well in this scandal?
That hasn't come out yet, though I would not dismiss it as one probes deeper. I mean, the first part we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg, the key figures involved and the scale of the money. But what it tells us, and as you rightly pointed out, that corruption in the energy sector has been the Achilles heel of Ukraine in its efforts to democratize. And at this moment, the energy sector is so tied to Ukraine's survival, and people are putting up with such enormous suffering as Russia bombards these facilities. What's also important to note is that following the money seems to indicate that some of these bribes were laundered through Russian financial institutions. So what we're seeing is not only something that is just a Ukrainian operation, but something in which Russia has its hand and figures in an important way.
Well, Russia set up a system of bribery via Gazprom. It was the cash cow, right? That
Yes,
that kept the kind of Putin-friendly governments in Ukraine until Maidan, when the people rose up and drove the crooks out of town.
But what's significant with this, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is that there has been such a rise of of Ukrainian patriotism and anti-Russian feeling that to find Russia having its hand in the till with this corruption is, just rubbing salt into the wounds of what it reveals both about the energy sector, but the willingness of this corrupt people to use Russian mechanisms to deposit their money, transfer their money.
Well, there's some hideous examples of how the Ukrainians have sold out their country to the Russians, even during this war since the Russian invasion, because, for example, Kherson was taken by the Russians, and the Ukrainians had to spend a lot of blood and treasure fighting, recapturing it, because the military leader apparently took a huge bribe from the Russians and turned off all the mines that allowed the Russians to take Kherson. So there's many examples of that. So there's a kind of a fifth column, is there not?
And
Russian
corruption has always undermined national security. And with so many lives being lost and so much suffering, this example of massive corruption undermining national security at a critical time just makes this all the more damaging and disturbing to Ukrainians.
But won't this play into Trump and J.D. Vance's hands, in as much as J.D. Vance basically wants nothing to do with Ukraine? He has no time for NATO or for the Europeans in general, for reasons I don't quite understand. And you know that Trump is entirely transactional and completely amoral. He doesn't see Ukraine as this brave, beleaguered country that's fighting against this monstrous enemy, neighbor that's invaded them. And Trump equates Putin with Zelensky, and it seems to be more sympathetic to Putin, even though he's the criminal and the invader, than he is to Zelensky. So this is not going to help, right?
It's it's certainly not going to help in American support for Ukraine, but that's been diminishing, and the Europeans have been stepping up ever more to the plate to protect Ukraine. But this is requiring more pressure for the German minister, for others to defend Ukraine and justify bailing them out when there is such corruption in a key sector. And who knows how much more lies beyond this, because this is just a major part of the Ukrainian economy.
So is this bringing back memories of Viktor Yanukovych and his golden toilet? Is that, I mean, it's got to be pretty depressing to think that after all of the sacrifices of the Ukrainian people, that they've still got vestiges of Putin's cronies and that kind of corruption.
I don't think it's, we're not looking at Zelensky as having golden toilets and, a castle in the middle of town with gardens and rare animals. But the problem is that Zelensky has not been able to get key figures in his administration to be clean and observe the rule of law. And that's what Ukraine desperately needs. That's what its population is fighting for. And so this is like being hit in the solar plexus by those who are living in the society and hoped for not only a peaceful future, but a future disassociated from the corruption that was so pervasive in the Soviet and the post-Soviet period.
So do we know where Timur Mindich is? He's on the lam. Is he in Russia or is he in somewhere else that presumably he wouldn't be in a NATO country, I don't think.
I don't know where he is. He could be on the lam in Russia. He could be on the lam in the UAE, somewhere in the Middle East, in which many criminals of the former Soviet Union go off to. So it's, it's not apparent at the moment, but he certainly found a safe place for himself, at least temporarily.
And just in closing then, Louise, Shelley, what is likely to happen with the European supporters? We were suggesting that Trump and Vance, it sort of plays into their hands because they want to cut bait at any rate. The Europeans are stepping up into filling the breach, not necessarily with enough, because the US has some key weapon systems like air defenses and intelligence that the Ukrainians need. There's a huge winter offensive underway. The Russians are poised to take Pokrovsk, which is a key part of the fortress belt. So it couldn't be happening at a worse time. And what do you think the European leaders that are supporting Zelensky, like the German Chancellor, the British Prime Minister, and the French President, etc., how are they reacting?
At the moment, those leaders are supporting Ukraine, but I think as the revelations expand, there is certainly going to be a demand for greater transparency, anti-corruption efforts, and especially in the military and in the transfer of weapons that are going from Western Europe into Ukraine. But I agree with you; it could not be happening at any worse time in terms of the need for Ukrainian support, and also with Russia intensifying its attacks on the Ukrainian energy system.
But just in closing, Louise, Putin's strategy is to undermine Western unity by helping fund far-right parties like the AfD in Germany and Le Pen in France. He's been doing that all along, and Farage in the UK, who's doing remarkably well at the moment. And his argument, or what he's tapping into, is a lot of disquiet in Western Europe about the fact that they have to spend a lot more on defense, and that will cut into social programs. So it's a very fertile field for active measures on the part of Putin. And this would feed into that, wouldn't it? Where, the average European is saying, why are we losing our social services in order to build up our military against Russia when the money is being stolen in Ukraine?
I'm glad you're bringing up this important point, because I'm not as concerned about Zelensky surviving, since he has had such support, though this undermines his credibility. But it certainly falls right into the pattern of Russia saying, this is not a country, it's a corrupt state, and it isn't deserving of support. And that's very, very damaging for Ukraine at this crucial and increasingly cold, physically cold time for them without the energy that they need.
Well, Dr. Louise Shelley, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
And again, I've been speaking with Dr. Louise Shelley, who's the Omar L. and Nancy Hurst Endowed Chair Emerita and a University Professor Emerita at George Mason University. And she's the founder of the Center on Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption at the South School of Policy and Government at George Mason University, and a leading expert on the relationship among terrorism, organized crime and corruption, as well as human trafficking, transnational crime and terrorism, with a particular focus on the former Soviet Union. And she also specializes in illicit financial flows and money laundering, and is the author of Dirty Entanglements, Corruption, Crime and Terrorism, and Dark Commerce, How a New Illicit Economy is Threatening Our Future. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into the defense pact that the White House is busily preparing ahead of Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince MBS's Oval Office visit next week.
Let me ask you one question. Is your money that good? Or will it buy you forgiveness? Do you think that it could? I think you will find when your death takes its toll, all the money you made will never never buy back your soul.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Christopher Prebble, the Senior Fellow and Director of the Reimagining U.S. Grand Strategy Program at the Stimson Center. And prior to joining the Stimson Center, he served as the co-director of the Atlantic Council's New America Engagement Initiative. He's the author of 4 books, including The Power Problem, How American Military Dominance Makes Us Less Safe, Less Prosperous, and Less Free, Fuel to the Fire, How Trump Made Americans' Broken Foreign Policy Even Worse, and How We Can Recover. And he co-edited with John Mueller, A Dangerous World, Threat Perception and U.S. National Security. And he was a commissioned officer in the United States Navy aboard the USS Ticonderoga. And he has an article at Responsible Statecraft, Trump Doesn't Need to Buy Saudi Loyalty with a Security Pact. Welcome to Background Briefing, Christopher Prebble.
Thank you.
So, Christopher, Mohammed bin Salman will be in the White House next Tuesday, and then on Wednesday there'll be a big investment conference going on with U.S. business leaders and Saudis with their usual deep pockets. But you're arguing that it doesn't need to buy Saudi loyalty with a security pact. Apparently, Trump has basically told the Saudis, look, when the war in Gaza is over, you need to make a deal with Israel. And
Right.
I find that a little hard to believe that the Saudis could do that
Mhm.
because the war with Gaza may be over, but the war on the West Bank is heating up.
Right.
And it looks as if the Israelis are determined to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. And I can't believe that the Saudis would be able to sign on to that kind of a deal with Israel while they're punishing the Palestinians after having punished them in Gaza. Because the street, even though Saudi Arabia is a ubiquitous dictatorship with tremendous control over the people, I still think that the Saudi royals have to look over their shoulder at the Arab street, don't they?
Well, you raise a good point, Ian, because I think that there have certainly been instances where either for principled reasons on the part of the Saudi royal family or out of concern for the sentiment within among their population, that the Saudis have insisted upon a Palestinian peace. They've not a Palestinian state. They've not opposed the notion of normalization with Israel, especially in recent years, but they always combine that with an insistence on progress towards a Palestinian state and rights for the Palestinians. That I don't know that that has changed. One of the points of leverage may be the concern about the rebuilding of Gaza and who's going to be taking the lead on that. If the Israelis expect the Saudis are going to do that, might there also need to be progress, as you say, to convince the Saudis that this is not, simply a deal with the Israelis and the Palestinians are being left in the lurch. I'm not convinced that what is motivating President Trump right now is mostly around those issues necessarily. He would like for there to be continued progress on, building on the Abraham Accords, but there are other reasons for the United States why I think the Trump administration is so interested in deepening relations with Saudi Arabia, which, as I argue with my colleague Will Smith, is probably wrong-headed relative to the importance of the kingdom for U.S. national interests.
So, Christopher, tell us why you think Trump wants to make this security deal.
Well, first and foremost, Trump loves deals. He loves deals of all kinds, and he has a unique ability among modern politicians to spin a deal as a victory because he is quite confident in his ability to message it that way, to claim that it is, an overwhelming success, and many of his supporters will accept that interpretation at face value, and he doesn't much care for the critics who would point out the details are not the way he describes them. So I think first and foremost, he likes deals. There are particular, economic interests, both for his family, for the families of some of his key advisors, that would benefit from a deepening of commercial and trade ties with the Saudis. And then, of course, there is the question of sort of continued access to Saudi resources, oil, and things like that. Although increasingly the focus is more on new technologies than on traditional old oil and petrochemicals and whatnot, because the United States is a net energy exporter. So as we say in our article, the days of the Carter Doctrine and explaining the region as sort of uniquely strategically important to the United States, that's long gone. Sure, Saudi oil is still an incredibly important part of the energy market globally. There's no disputing that. But the United States is certainly not dependent upon Saudi oil. We're not held hostage to it as it seemed we were in the 1970s. So just so much has changed in the global economy and global energy markets that simply is not a compelling reason for the United States drawing closer to Saudi Arabia in terms of a security agreement.
But given that Trump is a reality TV star and he likes to come up with a different episode every day, and now he's on the ropes over Epstein, and there's even an expectation amongst the chattering class in Washington that Trump is going to pull some kind of stunt to distract the press from Epstein. But it's not going to work with MBS on Tuesday, right? I mean, sitting down with Prince Bonesaw in the Oval Office is not a very good look to begin with, is it?
Well, here again, I think he can spin it that way. I think some of his supporters would see it as a win for the United States to be making progress with the Saudis. I don't think he's concerned so much about the optics there. I think the reality show that he's been running for the last 10 years does give him an ability to not really shape the information environment, but in some respects control it. And I think we're likely to see that whatever is said about the meeting, at least as far as his supporters are concerned, will, I think, fit with the Trump narrative.
Well, the advantage or disadvantage, depending on how you want to see it, that Trump has in foreign policy is that he breaks the norms and does stuff that no of his predecessors would do. And the
Right.
most recent example was in order to get the Gaza deal, he gave Qatar a security guarantee,
Right.
short of a treaty. A treaty is hard to get because you got to get two-thirds of the Senate.
Right.
But that's obviously what's driving the Saudis are saying, well, you've given Qatar a guarantee that you'd come to their aid in the event that they're attacked, just like Article 5 of the NATO treaty.
Right.
So why not us? I mean,
Right.
he's opened a real can of worms.
That's right. And of course, there was an incident during his first term, the attack on the Saudi oil facilities at Abqaiq. That some people presumed that would elicit a U.S. response, and what it got instead was kind of a yawn. The United States did not retaliate. But as Will and I point out, since that has happened, the Saudis and the Iranians have, with the assistance of the Chinese, have negotiated, something of a thawing of their relationship. There's the potential for the concern that the Saudis might have once had for the threat posed by Iran, I think has mitigated somewhat. And you're right about the Qatari example. That was quite a dramatic moment where the president extended a security guarantee in effect to the Qataris by executive agreement. You're right that it's not as the same as a ratified treaty, but it's also true that the United States has a number of other relationships, including what we would, I think, fairly describe as security alliances on the basis of an executive agreement, not a ratified treaty. Now, you can argue, as I do, that that's not as credible as a ratified treaty, and yet here you have it. The president has made this commitment, and at least as long as he is in office, if anything occurred that would seem to challenge that agreement, he would be hard pressed to say no. And so then I would ask the question, what actually has changed between now and 7 or 8 years ago when the attack on the Saudi oil facilities? If he concluded correctly, I think that was not a compelling U.S. national interest to respond to involve the United States in a conflict potentially between the Saudis and the Iranians, or the Saudis and the Houthis in Yemen. Then what has changed that would make it wise for the president to involve the United States in a war on Saudi Arabia's behalf today in 2025?
Well, one of the frightening things about Trump is how much he's undermining the most powerful weapon that the United States has, and that is the dollar as the global reserve currency.
Hmm.
And the red notices that come from the Treasury are more, in many ways, a more powerful weapon than the weapons that the Pentagon has. But by getting into crypto and by this tariff chaos that he's imposing on the international trading community, the dollar is not necessarily, or certainly not as strong as it was. But my understanding is that the Saudis, I don't know whether they pulled the trigger or whether they're toying it with it. But do you know, Chris, whether or not the Saudis are allowing the Chinese to buy Saudi oil in yuan, not dollars?
I had heard that. I don't know that for certain, but I had heard that there was some talk about diversifying, what currencies would be accepted for the purchase of Saudi oil. That may be correct.
But that's a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. And I think the challenge for those of us I share your concern about the weakening of the dollar. The challenge is that so far no one alternative has emerged. What you have instead are a range of alternatives. Some of those are, non-traditional crypto and whatnot. But the Chinese, of course, Chinese currency is not going to be particularly attractive to many because it's not convertible. And so that's a challenge for China, sort of replacing the dollar. There is no other currency. The euro doesn't qualify. Dollar remains the major reserve currency for the world.
So, do you think anything's going to happen before Tuesday?
Well, no, I think he wants a dramatic moment. Both President Trump and MBS, I presume, want some dramatic footage. Again, we were speculating about the security deal because there have been rumors of this. I've not seen any official confirmation that this is in the works or is likely. But precisely because the Qatari case went through with so little prior comment, it really caught many of us by surprise. Will Smith and I thought it was really important to get out ahead of any potential consideration for a U.S.-Saudi security agreement and spelling out, as we did it at Responsible Statecraft, spelling out the many reasons why that such a deal would not advance U.S. national security interests.
Right, but MBS's younger brother, Prince Salman, he's been in Washington working on this deal, right? So they're frantically trying to put this package together, aren't they?
That's right. Again, but I've not heard anyone from the Trump administration, and certainly not in an official capacity, say that this is what, the purpose of this meeting is next week. It's from my perspective, it's still speculative. We may know quite soon, whether this will materialize. But here again, there was to my knowledge, there was absolutely no preparatory work or even, trial balloons floated in the media about the Qatari security deal. That just showed up one day. The president signed it, and here again, the founding fathers of the U.S. Constitution are rolling in their graves because they never really expected the president of the United States to have this kind of unilateral power, and yet Donald Trump wields it every day.
But just in the last couple of minutes, though, in going back, Christopher, to talk about tensions between Israel and Saudi Arabia and the extent to which Trump has already apparently told MBS that he wants him to sign on to the Abraham Accords once the Gaza war is over.
Mhm.
There are other irritants in that relationship that make it difficult for the Saudis. And that is, of course, that the Saudis are the ones, MBS is the one that introduced Trump to the new Syrian leader, Shara.
Mhm.
And the US has different, and so do the Turks, have different policies and plans for stabilizing Syria
Right.
and getting rid of the sanctions. But the Israelis don't. They're against the US stabilizing. They want to keep Syria weak. And I'm
Correct.
assuming that the Saudis are not happy with that. So it's not as if it's going to be easy to bring Saudi Arabia and Israel together.
No, you wouldn't think so. I mean, the Saudis and the Syrians also have had traditionally a rather, it's a uneven relationship. But you're right that now that Assad is gone, the Saudis may be much more optimistic about the prospects for good relations and would like more countries to side with them and sort of strengthen the new government there. But you're right that the Israelis' position, both in their actions and their words, is that they would prefer Syria to remain weak and divided. They don't want it to start attracting the kind of international support that it has the potential to do with Saudi Arabia and the United States backing it.
Right, and it needs a lot of investment.
Correct. Yeah, of
It's a
course. Yeah.
destroyed country.
Right. Exactly.
And so is Gaza, by the way.
That's right. Gaza's, of course, a lot smaller, but so truly demolished in many respects by the ongoing war. The difference, of course, is that Gaza is not a sovereign state. Syria is. There are certain privileges that the Syrian government has by virtue of their sovereignty that the Palestinians in Gaza simply do not have, and so that's an additional complication for them in trying to secure the financing they need to rebuild.
Well, I guess we'll see what happens on Tuesday.
Indeed.
I'm sure Saudi's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will be comfortable in the Oval Office, surrounded by all that gold decoration.
All that gold, yeah, all the new gold, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I thank you for joining us, Christopher Prebble.
Thank you, sir.
And again, I've been speaking with Christopher Prebble, who is a senior fellow and director of the Reimagining U.S. Grand Strategy Program at the Stimson Center. Prior to joining the Stimson Center, he served as the co-director of the Atlantic Council's New American Engagement Initiative, and he's the author of 4 books, including The Power Problem, How American Military Dominance Makes Us Less Safe, Less Prosperous, and Less Free, Fuel to the Fire, How Trump Made America's Broken Foreign Policy Even Worse, and How We Can Recover. And he co-edited with John Mueller A Dangerous World, Threat Perception, and U.S. National Security. And he was a commissioned officer on the U.S. Navy in the U.S. Navies and served aboard the USS Ticonderoga, and has an article at Responsible Statecraft, Trump Doesn't Need to Buy Saudi Loyalty with a Security Pact. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Sasha Linden Cohen, and Asher Price. If you missed any of today's program or would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on those platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, as well as also now on Blue Sky at Ian Masters Media. And please do help us reach more listeners by sharing the program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help us sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Background Briefing, and I'm always available at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
The guy that lived next door in 305 took the kids to the park and disappeared by 9:30. Who will ever know how much he loved them so? That dark night alone in America. A quiet voice singing something to me. An angel song about the home of the brave in this land here of the free. One time, one night in America. Four small boys playing ball in the parking lot. A preacher, a teacher, and the other became a car. A car skidded into the rain, making the last little one to say, one more light goes out in America. A young girl tosses a coin in the wishing well. She hopes for a heaven while for her there's just this hell. She gave away her life to become somebody's wife. Another wish, an